I was never a man of secrets. But my wife's betrayal changed everything. For 3 years, she had slept with her boss, 120 times, she confessed. As the words left her lips, it felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was the woman I thought I knew. Now, she was just a stranger. That confession, those 120 lies, shattered my soul, and I knew then revenge would be my only salvation. For the last 6 months, my life had been challenging as my wife, Cassie, seemed to be getting closer to her boss, Ted Walker. I worried that if he hadn't already, he might get closer to her in ways I didn't like. Ted had a confident personality and charm that drew people in, but he often took advantage of others. A few years ago, I had been in a position to give him feedback about his work, but that didn't seem to affect his career much. However, he appeared to hold a grudge against me, wanting to interfere in my life. Over the past 6 months, things had been strained between Cassie and me. I was hoping a vacation in Mexico City with the kids would help, but the situation escalated quickly. Cassie confronted me with a choice. Either I leave my writing career and go back to my previous job in accounting, or she would consider ending our marriage. I suspected Ted was behind this pressure. I hadn't confirmed if Cassie was involved with Ted, but the night before, I saw her leaving his hotel room looking disheveled, which only fueled my concerns. Things went from bad to worse when I found myself trapped on the hotel's 49th floor with the President of Mexico and my family, while armed individuals targeted the President. I feared for our safety, knowing that if they reached him, they might harm anyone nearby. Looking for reassurance, I turned to Captain Lopez, the President's head of security. Just then, his radio crackled with urgent chatter in rapid Spanish, and gunfire echoed in the background. The captain translated for everyone, explaining that there were several armed individuals in the hotel attempting to assassinate the President, and his team was outnumbered. "The fire alarms are sounding," Captain Lopez added. "This means the elevators will shut down, taking everyone to the ground floor." The President conferred with his chief of security before addressing us all, indicating we needed to reach the roof where a helicopter would come to our aid. He urged everyone to stay calm and follow his security team. "We still have time," the captain reassured us. "They'll need to climb the stairs, which will take them much longer." The people in the hotel began to leave for the stairway leading to the roof. Captain Lopez's radio buzzed again, and I could hear more gunfire. He spoke firmly into the device as he seemed to give directions. After he finished his call, he turned to the President and informed him in Spanish, something that visibly concerned the President. The President then asked in English, "What is the current situation? Everyone should understand what's happening." "The police are surrounding the hotel now," Lopez responded. "Army units are on their way, but they may take some time to arrive. However, the helicopter should reach us before the armed individuals can access this floor." The President nodded, asking for a second helicopter to ensure we all could evacuate safely. He encouraged Captain Lopez, then moved towards the stairway with security personnel. Cassie and the kids stood a bit away, only catching fragments of the conversation. When the President began to leave with his security team, Cassie approached me, her face showing concern. "Andy, what's happening?" she asked, fear evident in her tone. "The armed individuals are trying to capture the President," I quickly explained. "We need to go to the roof for evacuation." I could see the worry on my children's faces, matching Cassie's expression. Despite the tension between Cassie and me, my priority was to safeguard my family, including her. It was an instinctive duty of a husband and a father. As we made our way with the others, Captain Lopez called out to me, requesting that I stay behind for a moment. He asked Peter and Billy to stay too. The worried looks on my family's faces tugged at my heart. "You all go ahead," I said to them, trying to sound calm. "I'll be right behind you." Cassie looked concerned, a surprising reaction given our recent issues. Still, I was determined to do everything possible to keep them safe. Once they were secure, we would figure out the rest later. After ensuring Cassie and the kids went ahead to the stairwell, I turned to Captain Lopez. He gestured me over to a floor plan displayed on the wall, typical of hotels, showing the layout clearly. They indicated where the exits were in case of a fire or, in our situation, a serious threat. "Have any of you ever fired a gun?" the captain asked. I was concerned by that question. It suggested that Captain Lopez was preparing for a confrontation, and we already knew we were outnumbered. Billy quickly shook his head. "No, I dislike guns." Pete nodded. "I've fired a .22 rifle and a target pistol." When the captain turned to me, I nodded as well. "I belong to a shooting club. I own 2 handguns and a carbine." "Mr. Taggart," the captain directed to Billy, "you head up to the roof with the others." Billy didn't need to be told twice and jogged away. "I'm not sure about everything going on," the captain said, "but we're in a difficult situation." Before he could explain more, his cell phone rang. He answered it and then cursed. "Oh, no!" He then spoke quickly in Spanish. "I guess that wasn't good news?" I asked. The captain nodded. "The president's helicopter has a mechanical problem. I told the pilot to find another helicopter if needed. It may take longer than I first thought. We might have to defend ourselves. Also, there are more cartel members in the hotel than I realized. Before the elevators were shut down, many gunmen used them to reach the 25th floor. Now they have to search floor by floor for the president, which will give us some time. However, this attack was well organized. There are still many cartel members on the ground floor who have blocked access to the building. They have also placed obstacles throughout the city to slow down the police and military." "So, what do you want us to do?" I asked. "I've ordered my men on the ground floor to move up to the 20th floor and block any intruders. The others will join me here," the captain said, pointing to the building plan. "There are only 2 stairways to the roof. We must hold both stairs. If necessary, we can retreat to the doorways leading to the roof. We must delay the intruders until help arrives." I understood that the captain was focused on protecting the president, but I was worried about what would happen if the cartel reached the roof. They would harm everyone there, including my family. A wave of fear for my wife and kids surged within me. I knew I would do anything to protect them. Captain Lopez raised his radio and spoke quickly in Spanish again. He then turned back to Peter and me. "My men from the ground floor are in position. The rest are making their way up to join us. We don't have much time. We need to create obstacles on the stairs to make it harder for them to reach us." The captain instructed us to start moving furniture down the stairwell. He wanted to make it difficult for the intruders to reach us. Then, he asked us to build a barricade on the landing just before the last stairs to the roof. We began with the furniture from Maria Shiver's suite, which was still accessible. At the same time, the captain quickly opened the doors to several other rooms with his master key. He then left with 3 of his men to secure the other stairway. Over the next 10 minutes, we emptied Maria's suite and a few other rooms of furniture. We moved everything we could before placing it onto the stairs. It wouldn't stop the intruders, but hopefully it would slow them down. Moments after I tossed a piece of furniture over the railing, 5 men appeared. I reached for a security agent's weapon leaning against the wall, but the agent stopped me. "No," he said in English. "Good guys." I watched as the 5 men climbed over the furniture we had thrown down. Disappointingly, they didn't seem to struggle. I lost track of how many security agents Captain Lopez had with us, but I felt relieved when I saw that they were armed. One of the men had an injured arm, and his shirt was torn. I noticed that he was wearing a protective vest underneath. Captain Lopez came back just after the last man reached the top of the stairs. He began speaking rapidly in Spanish, but I only caught the names Peter and Andy. I assumed he was identifying us, but he didn't introduce us to his men. "Andy, Peter, I'm leaving 3 of my men here. I want you to continue moving furniture down the stairs and build the barricade," he instructed. The captain sent 2 other men to the other stairway before opening more rooms for us. With determination, the 6 of us moved nearly 2 more rooms' worth of furniture down the stairs. Still, I wondered how long that would really slow the intruders down. But we had to focus on building the barricade. I was unsure what could stop the bullets we might face. One of the Mexican security men had an idea. He instructed us to bring mattresses to the landing. He then went from room to room, breaking apart desks. I joined him while Peter and the other security men began removing electrical wires from the lamps. Once we had collected everything, we stacked the mattresses on their sides with the desks between them. We secured the mattresses and desks together using wire, hoping it would provide some protection. It wasn't much, but it might help, depending on the strength of what they would throw at us. Not long after, Captain Lopez returned, offering his help. He brought a couple of weapons, one for me and another for Peter. Peter looked unsure about using it, so Captain Lopez gave him a quick lesson on how to handle it, loading and firing in a basic way. I checked my own weapon, making sure it was loaded and ready. The captain handed us extra magazines, just in case. "If you don't feel ready for this," he said gently, "it's okay to move to a safer spot." Peter shook his head, determined. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. I felt the same. I couldn't leave my family behind no matter what. Captain Lopez said a quiet prayer, then there was a long pause. It seemed like the danger was getting closer. We could hear noise from below. "They're careful," Captain Lopez muttered. "They know they might face resistance, which is good for us." The first sign of trouble came when a figure peeked up from the stairwell and then ducked back. There were quick exchanges in Spanish, and we knew they were planning something. Gunfire broke out on the other stairway, making me anxious, but I had to trust that the captain had things under control. Moments later, another figure appeared, this time not quick enough to avoid a shot from Captain Lopez. This led to a burst of gunfire from below, causing us to duck. A second attacker tried to make a move, but was stopped. There was an explosion, but thankfully the barrier held up just enough. Peter was shaken, and there was a brief check to make sure he was okay. Another wave of attackers came, but we held our ground. It was clear, however, that we couldn't stay here forever. The attackers were getting closer, and soon, even our barrier wouldn't be enough. I began the day realizing that my marriage was over. But now, I wasn't thinking about that. My thoughts were entirely on my family, hoping they would be safe from the dangers closing in. I couldn't stop thinking about what I might miss if I didn't make it out. I wouldn't see my kids grow up, graduate, or start families of their own. The thought overwhelmed me, and I could feel tears welling up. After a moment of silence, I glanced around and saw something metallic being passed to a man behind a couple of stacked chairs. My reaction must have alerted Captain Lopez, who immediately dropped and shouted, "Take cover!" An explosion rocked the stairs a few steps down, pushing our barricade back, though it somehow held. A security officer managed to take down the man responsible for firing. The remaining group of attackers retreated momentarily. I slumped back against the wall, the force of everything catching up with me. Nausea hit, and I vomited. My body was trembling from the blast, and when I looked down, I saw red on my shirt. I was bleeding, but I didn't know from where at first. Touching my forehead revealed a cut, and the sight of blood made me dizzy. Despite the bleeding, I realized the wound wasn't life-threatening. I tore part of my shirt to cover it and slowed the bleeding. Once I had calmed a bit, I noticed that Peter had been injured too, with blood dripping down his arm. Captain Lopez was already attending to him, wrapping his wound to slow the bleeding. Suddenly, another wave of attackers charged. We exchanged fire for what felt like hours. One of the men was preparing to fire another explosive device when Captain Lopez took him out just in time. The weapon misfired and hit the ceiling instead, causing debris to rain down on the attackers below. After the chaos, Captain Lopez briefly surveyed the scene, but it was clear the attackers weren't finished. I could hear them regrouping. Pete was injured, and I was still bleeding. Two of our group were gone, and the rest of us were wounded. It felt like our time was running out. Just as things looked bleak, the sound of a helicopter cut through the air. The battle continued in the other stairwell, but Captain Lopez told us to head to the roof. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed some supplies from one of the fallen guards, helped Pete to his feet, and we made our way up. On the roof, the president was surrounded by his bodyguards, and several guests huddled nearby. I quickly found my family, but seeing Ted standing awkwardly off to the side filled me with a mix of emotions. Cassie rushed toward me with the kids, visibly shaken. She saw the blood and tried to clean my face with a towel, her concern momentarily pushing aside the tension between us. Captain Lopez signaled for us to follow him. I picked up my gun and prepared to leave, but Cassie called out, "Andy, stay with us." "I have to go," I said, trying to reassure her. I kissed her on the cheek, knowing deep down that this might be the last time. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. Either I wouldn't survive, or she would leave me for Ted. At that moment, the uncertainty felt unbearable. About a dozen men from the cartel were making their way to the top of the stairs. Only one of Captain Lopez's team was still alive. Captain Lopez and the 3 men with him quickly opened fire. At least 4 of the men fell instantly, but 2 of the security personnel also went down in the exchange. I switched my weapon to automatic and steadied myself. I knew the recoil would push the gun upward, but I managed to keep it aimed correctly and saw 4 more men fall. The others rushed back down the stairs. I reloaded my weapon and fired a series of shots after them. During the brief pause, I removed the empty magazine and inserted my last one. I hurried to take cover behind a barricade. We exchanged fire for several minutes as the noise of a helicopter grew louder. I could hear gunfire below, and while I wasn't sure what it meant, the smile on Captain Lopez's face suggested it was either the police or the army. "Andy," the captain called to me, "get to the roof. Send my team down here. Get your family on the helicopter. We'll hold them until we can secure this stairway." "Are you sure?" I replied. "Yes, you've done enough. Now take care of your family." As I burst onto the roof, the helicopter was just about to touch down. I ran to the security man and sent him back to the stairs. Moments later, the helicopter's side door swung open, and the man inside was signaling for everyone to board. Ted dashed ahead of everyone and jumped on board. I ran to my family, and Cassie immediately wrapped her arms around me, crying, "Thank God you're all right." As the president led the other hotel guests to the helicopter, I made sure my family was on board and secure in the middle of the helicopter next to Maria. Then I settled down by the door between Peter and Billy. Peter looked pale, but surprisingly, Billy looked even more so. Once everyone was on board, the helicopter attempted to take off but didn't move. The pilot tried several times, finally turning and shouting, "Too heavy!" "He says we're too heavy," an elderly man near the door translated. The president moved to the door and hopped down onto the roof. Since Peter, Billy, and I were next to the door, I nudged Billy. "Come on, let's get off." I didn't ask Peter since he was injured and seemed dazed. When I jumped off the helicopter, I heard Cassie yell, "No, Andy, you're hurt!" Just after we jumped down, 2 older men also exited the helicopter, but it still wouldn't take off. Peter climbed down next, but it still wasn't enough. All eyes turned to Ted, who retreated to a corner, shaking his head. "I'm not getting off," he said through clenched teeth. Just then, a bullet struck near the helicopter, and the sound of gunfire reminded us of the danger. We quickly looked for cover, but it was clear that if the helicopter didn't leave soon, it might not get away at all. Still, Ted refused to move. Suddenly, Captain Lopez appeared, carrying a rifle with a scope. He immediately began returning fire at the shooter on the other building, drawing the sniper's attention away from us. Those of us who had exited the helicopter began to run. I pointed toward a low wall where the president had taken shelter, and Billy, Peter, and I made our way toward it. But with my injured leg, I couldn't run quickly. It felt more like a limping jog. After only a few steps, I felt a sharp pain in my side and fell to the ground. As I went down, everything seemed to slow. I could see the green turf rising up to meet me, and then I heard Cassie's cry, "God, Andy, no!" followed by Sally yelling, "Daddy, Daddy!" I struggled to sit up, and as I did, I felt blood on my side. I looked over at the helicopter and saw the frightened faces of my wife and children. Moments later, the elderly man who had translated for the pilot struggled down to the roof. The helicopter finally lifted off, banking hard as it flew away from the roof. I felt myself start to fade. The last thing I thought was that my family was safe before everything went dark. Cassie as. We waited in the hallway for the interview to conclude. Andy seemed distant and stood away from me. When I tried to talk to him, he just shook his head and said, "Later." All I could think was, "Please, God, let him believe me." I kept repeating that prayer under my breath. Andy paced, glancing at the suite's door occasionally. I wished the interview would end so we could have a conversation. Then the captain's radio buzzed to life. Captain Lopez appeared agitated by the message he received. He immediately entered Maria's suite. Andy followed him into the room, and I sensed something was wrong, but I didn't understand what was happening. I heard mention of gunmen in the hotel, and fear gripped me. I gathered my children close and waited anxiously. I struggled to stay calm, but I was scared. I felt a bit better when I looked at Andy and noticed how composed he was, despite the concern on his face. Then the president ordered us to follow his security guard to the roof. However, when the captain said he wanted Andy to stay behind, I felt panic rising again. "Andy, please stay with us," I pleaded. "It's okay," he reassured me. "I'll be there soon." But he didn't come soon. Sally was crying, and I held her close as tears streamed down my cheeks. Kevin kept asking if his dad would be all right. I kept reassuring him that everything would be okay, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Maria was kind and stayed close to the children, calming them down. President Sanchez tried to reassure everyone that his team had control of the situation, but the worry on his face was clear. His 3 security guards moved everyone against a wall and prepared themselves, pulling out their equipment and taking defensive positions. There was nothing we could do but wait. When the sounds of conflict started and Andy still hadn't returned, I began to cry. Maria hugged me, trying to stay strong, but I knew she was scared too. I couldn't stop thinking about Andy, knowing he was caught up in the danger. The thought of losing him was unbearable, and I regretted the mistakes I had made. The gunshots grew more frequent from both stairways, followed by a loud blast. The silence that came after was broken only by the sound of Sally crying. Kevin tried to run toward the stairway, but Maria quickly held him back. Another explosion echoed, followed by more gunfire. Oddly, the renewed noise brought me a bit of hope, knowing that those with Andy were still fighting. It was a small comfort, but it was something to cling to in this terrifying situation. The fight seemed endless, but my heart lifted when I heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. Just as relief began to wash over me, there was another loud explosion, followed by more shooting. The roof near where Andy was stationed seemed to tremble. I froze, unable to breathe as silence fell over that side. Finally, I saw Andy emerge with Peter, a security guard, and Captain Lopez. He was covered in blood, and we all rushed to him. "Andy, you're hurt," I said, holding him tightly. He hugged me back and reassured me. "It looks worse than it is." I wiped the blood from his face with a towel, embracing him again. We stayed like that until Andy noticed Captain Lopez and the others moving toward the other stairway where the battle continued. Andy began to follow them. "Andy, no!" I pleaded. "Stay with us." "I have to go," he said gently, kissing my cheek. "It'll be all right." As Andy stepped through the doorway, the gunfire resumed. My legs gave out and I broke down in tears. The thought of losing him was devastating. I prayed, asking for another chance to make things right. How could I have ever doubted him? With my children gathered around me, I glanced at Ted, the man I once compared to Andy. Ted, who had seemed confident at the beginning, was now hiding in a corner, trembling. His earlier bravado had vanished when he realized the seriousness of the situation. He had tried complaining and shouting at the president, but after being ignored, he sulked and distanced himself from the group. Now he was cowering behind a pile of chairs. Seeing him like that filled me with disgust. As the helicopter landed, I couldn't take my eyes off the door. I was desperate for Andy to return. When he finally emerged, I felt a wave of relief. But then I saw Ted burst from his hiding place and dash to the helicopter, pushing past everyone to get on board first. The rest of the group moved calmly, following the president. I clung to Andy, but he gently urged us forward. I kept looking back to make sure he was still with us. Once on board, the president helped people climb into the helicopter. Andy assisted Sally and Maria, then helped me up while Kevin climbed in on his own. We all found seats, and Andy positioned himself by the door with Billy and Peter. As the helicopter pilot tried to take off, we remained stuck. "Too much weight!" someone yelled. President Sanchez, seeing the issue, sighed and stepped off the helicopter. But even with him off, the machine still couldn't lift off. I saw Andy and Billy exchange a look before they both jumped off as well. "Andy, no! You're injured!" I cried. He turned and gave me a sad smile, and I realized how much I truly loved him. A moment later, 2 older men followed Andy, and Peter got off as well. But still, the helicopter remained too heavy. Everyone turned their attention to Ted, but he refused to move. "No way I'm getting off," he snapped. Suddenly there was a loud noise as something struck the side of the helicopter. The reality hit me. Someone was firing at us. The people in the helicopter started to shout in panic. I saw Andy trying to run with the other men for safety, but just a few steps in, he suddenly turned around and collapsed. I yelled, "No, Andy!" I heard Sally crying out, "Daddy! Daddy!" At that moment, an older gentleman carefully stepped onto the roof as the helicopter began to rise. Andy sat up, looking confused. He reached to his side and pulled back his hand, which was covered in red. Then the helicopter tilted sharply and descended below the edge of the building. As we flew away, I spotted Army helicopters heading in the opposite direction. But that was all I could focus on as I sobbed uncontrollably, holding Sally and Kevin tightly, both of them weeping too. The helicopter landed at an Army airfield and we were led into what seemed like a small terminal. The men who helped us had no information about anyone left behind. All they knew was that the fight for the Fantasia Hotel was still ongoing. About half an hour later, a bus arrived, and we were taken to a large police station. There, we were separated and questioned. Still, no one had answers. I was overwhelmed with worry and began to feel anxious. The men questioning me remained calm but had no information to offer. Finally, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and called my workplace. Soon, I was connected to Mr. Bracken. "Cassie, are you okay?" he asked immediately. "We're all watching the news here." "Yes, Mr. Bracken," I replied, "and as far as I know, everyone from our team is okay. But Andy was still on the hotel roof, and he seems to be hurt." I lost my composure and started to cry as I continued. "The authorities won't give me any updates. I don't know if Andy is still alive." "Cassie," Mr. Bracken said firmly, "I'll make some calls. As soon as I find out anything, I'll let you know." I sat down and cried harder than I ever had before. After a few minutes, the men questioning me realized I needed a break. They left, and soon after, Kevin and Sally were brought into the room. We huddled together, and I tried to be strong for them, but my heart was breaking. I had never felt so miserable in my life. Around 15 minutes later, my phone rang. I saw that it was Mr. Bracken. "Mr. Bracken, did you find anything out?" I asked quickly. "I haven't learned much, Cassie," he said gently. "However, I did find out that your husband has been taken to a hospital. I've arranged for a car to take you and the kids to him." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful. "Cassie," Mr. Bracken added before hanging up, "we're all thinking of you here." I whispered a thank you and waited. Sally cried throughout the helicopter ride and continued to sob. Just when it seemed she was calming down, her shoulders would shake again with tears. I was a mess and didn't know how long I could stay strong for my children, but it was Kevin who worried me the most. He had cried very little during the flight and had mostly gone quiet afterward. When I tried to talk to him, he responded with only a few words before walking away. About 30 minutes after I had spoken to Mr. Bracken, a car arrived, and the police let us leave. The driver didn't speak any English, so the ride to the hospital was silent except for Sally's soft cries. The hospital was chaotic. Many victims from the hotel attack were being brought here. It took a long while to find someone who could speak English and help me. Finally, we were led to a waiting area on the surgical floor. Still, no one would provide any updates. The waiting felt endless. Every time the door opened, I jumped to my feet, my heart racing, only to feel a wave of despair when it was just new visitors. Finally, after almost 3 hours, a surgeon appeared, still in scrubs. "Mrs. Spencer?" he asked with a heavy accent. "Yes," I said, standing up quickly. "How is my husband?" "Please, let's go to the conference room," he said, pointing to a small room with a table and chairs. I left my children waiting and followed the doctor. Once we were seated, I anxiously asked, "Is my husband going to be okay?" "I don't know," the doctor replied seriously. "His injuries are quite severe, and he has lost a lot of blood. Even if he recovers, we can't be sure there won't be complications. A piece of one of the bullets was near his spine. We were able to remove it, but we're unsure if it will affect him." Tears poured down my face. "He's going to live, right?" The doctor shrugged. "We'll know more in 24 hours. Right now, we can only wait and see how he responds. He is in good care." "Can I see him?" I asked through my tears. "He's unconscious. But if you follow me, I can let you see him for a few minutes." After explaining to the kids that I was going to see their father and that they should stay put, I followed the doctor. My legs felt weak as I entered the intensive care unit. Andy was there, connected to machines and looking pale. How could I have ever treated him poorly? My heart hurt seeing him like that. I tried to comfort the kids from the door. Kevin's eyes lit up and he wanted to see his dad. He became upset when I told him only I could go in. He told me that it wasn't fair because he thought I didn't even care for his father. That stung deeply, almost as much as the idea of losing Andy. I broke down in tears. Kevin said he was sorry and moved to the other side of the waiting room. As the hours passed, I couldn't stop thinking about what my son had said. It hurt to realize how much my attitude towards their father had shown. If something happened to Andy, I didn't know how I would mend my relationship with my children. Around 2 in the morning, I finally fell asleep. I don't know how long I was out, but I was awakened by a gentle shake on my shoulder. It was the doctor. My heart raced. "Mrs. Spencer, your husband is bleeding internally. We need to take him back into surgery. He's very weak, and I'm not sure if he can handle another operation." Andy, I found myself standing in the front yard of my parents' house. They were on the porch, smiling at me. It felt strange since they had passed away years ago. However, I was so exhausted, and it looked so peaceful where they sat that I tried to climb the porch steps. My father shook his head and pointed to the street. Then he said, "It's not your time." Suddenly, everything faded away. I opened my eyes with great effort, feeling as though I was choking. Panic set in, and I tried to clear my throat. An alarm rang out, and a nurse rushed to one of my IVs. I saw her use a syringe on something connected to the tubing. Moments later, I drifted back into sleep. When I awoke again, it was night. At least the choking sensation was gone. Whatever was in my throat had been removed, but my throat was sore now. Everything seemed to hurt. My face, arms, chest, legs, and of course, my throat. I felt someone holding my hand, but I couldn't focus my eyes. I only knew it was a woman. All I could manage to say was, "hurt." I wasn't sure if she understood my words, but the sight of me in pain must have made it clear. The woman stepped out, and shortly after, a nurse appeared. After receiving another shot, I fell asleep again. When I awoke for the third time, I felt my bed moving. Then I lost consciousness. "Mr. Spencer? Mr. Spencer?" I heard a voice and felt someone shaking me. It felt like I was underwater, struggling to surface. Finally, I managed to open my eyes and grunt. "Mr. Spencer," the voice said, "it's time for you to wake up." I stayed awake for a short while before drifting back to sleep. They kept waking me and asking questions. At first, I struggled to understand them, and talking was hard. Eventually, I cleared my mind enough to respond, though it was still tough. When they stirred me again, they began examining my legs and feet with needles, wanting to see if I experienced any weakness. Each prick hurt, but I felt no numbness. The following day, I learned they wanted to test my cognitive abilities. It was hard to stay awake. In the last 3 days, I'd likely only been awake for an hour total. The doctor started asking me for my name and birthday, then moved on to random questions like who the president was. But when he asked for my wife's name, everything came rushing back. Memories of our trip to Mexico City, my work, and tearful moments. "I must admit I didn't expect your recovery to be this quick," the doctor said. "You've been in a medically induced coma for 10 days. As I lay in bed, I reflected on everything. Then it hit me. I had no idea what had happened to my family, and all I could think of was that my marriage was falling apart." "Is my family all right?" I managed to ask, tears rolling down my cheeks. "Oh, yes, they're doing well," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. "You'll see them soon. I couldn't believe that Cassie and the kids might still be here. I thought they had to return to their lives. Perhaps I misunderstood the doctor. Maybe he meant when I went home." "We believe that patients recover faster the sooner we get them up," he continued. "We're going to help you out of bed today. You'll need to start using your muscles again. Your leg may be a bit sore, but we can provide crutches or a walker if necessary." About an hour later, frustrated with the television that seemed unresponsive, I looked up just as Kevin and Sally burst into the room. "Daddy!" Sally exclaimed, rushing forward to hug me. Kevin was more reserved, but he eventually hugged me too. From over his shoulder, I noticed Cassie standing nearby, looking anxious. Once the kids stepped back, Cassie approached quickly. She kissed me and began to cry. "I was so scared we were going to lose you, Andy. I love you so much." I was taken aback. Was it possible that Cassie still loved me? I wanted nothing more than to hold her. After a moment, she lifted her head, gave me another kiss, then stepped back with a warm smile. "I thought you would be in Austin," I said, my voice still weak. "I understand why you might think that," she replied, pain flickering across her face. "But we've been here with you the entire time. Nothing could have kept us away." "What about your job and the kids' school?" I asked. Cassie shook her head and glanced at Sally and Kevin, who both nodded. Sally spoke then. "Dad, there's no way we were going to leave you alone." Sally's eyes filled with tears, and her voice trembled as she spoke. Kevin noticed his sister's distress and quickly reassured her. Dad, please don't think we would ever leave you. We'll catch up on schoolwork later. That can wait. We just want you to get better so we can go home together. The kids are right, Cassie added softly. Let's focus on your recovery first. We can deal with everything else later. She paused, looking down before sitting beside my bed. I need to apologize for how I've behaved, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I've shared everything with the kids about the past couple of years, including what happened with Ted Walker. They've understood and forgiven me. Now I'm asking for your forgiveness, too. I want you to know that I truly care for you. Until that moment, I had felt a dark cloud hanging over me. While I was mostly focused on getting better, I thought I might have to face a future without Cassie. But now, for the first time, that darkness seemed to lift. I needed to hear her out. Cassie took my hand and continued. That night in the hall, I thought I had ruined everything. Please believe me when I say nothing happened between Ted and me. I was foolish to think he truly wanted to help my career. All he cared about was his own interests. When you saw me in the hallway, it hit me just how wrong he was, and I couldn't stay. I felt awful about what I saw in your eyes. I was devastated when I heard about your situation. Hearing Cassie say she finally understood Ted's true nature filled me with relief. I'm embarrassed that I even thought he was better than you, Cassie went on. Her face flushed, and her hands trembled. Ted uses charm to get what he wants, but deep down he's just not a good person. But isn't he in charge of the junior partnership committee? I pointed out. Won't that hurt your chances? No, because I resigned. I was shocked by her words. Cassie had always dreamed of becoming a partner at her accounting firm, and now she had chosen to give that up. Why did you do that? It was the only question I could think of. Cassie leaned in and kissed me gently. It was a sweet moment, bringing back a sense of connection that had been missing for a while. She continued, Most of my life I chased a dream that wasn't truly mine. I grew up with my dad talking about his efforts to become a partner, and when he passed away before achieving it, I unknowingly took on that ambition. But the thought of losing you changed everything for me. I realized that pursuing that dream wouldn't make me happy, and I didn't want to repeat my father's path of regret. I wanted to be with you instead. So I made the decision to focus on what truly matters. What did Mr. Bracken say about your resignation? I asked, still astonished by her choice. He hasn't accepted it yet, Cassie replied. He wants to speak with me when we return to Austin, but I know my family has to come first. Unfortunately, without my job, we can't keep our home. I've put it up for sale already. I hope it sells quickly. So you're saying we might be tight on money? I said with a small laugh. Cassie smiled. We might face some challenges, but my husband will become a great writer. I chuckled again, though it caused a bit of discomfort. Let's hope I can be a decent one. Can you forgive me for doubting you? Cassie asked, her eyes searching mine. I love you completely and no one else compares. My only wish has been to love you and be loved in return. I hugged her tightly, despite the pain, wanting to hold on forever. After a moment, Cassie kissed me again and stood up. What do you need right now? Can you tell me what happened after I was shot? I asked. No one here speaks much English, my TV doesn't work, and the papers are all in Spanish. Are you sure you want to know? Cassie replied with concern. I nodded. I can't recall every detail, she started. You can check when we get home, but as far as I remember, about a dozen of President Sanchez's security personnel were killed, and several were injured, including Captain Lopez. There were around 26 guests shot, with 7 fatalities. Many attackers were also killed or captured during those events. What about Peter and Billy? They're okay. Pete was hurt, but it's not serious. He just needs to wear a sling for a while. And your co-workers? Everyone from my office is fine. But it could have been much worse. They discovered a large amount of explosives. The assailants were planning to escape by helicopter and then destroy the hotel after targeting the president. The army intercepted those helicopters and forced them down. My goodness, was all I could say. Do you know what really disrupted their plans? I shook my head. The police chief's conference, Cassie said with a laugh. Even though they weren't supposed to bring any weapons into Mexico, just about every American police chief was armed. They caught the assailants off guard in the stairway. It threw everything off. I smiled and chuckled. You have to appreciate Americans and their commitment to safety. After a week, they released me from the hospital and we went home. I'd be lying if I said everything was smooth sailing from then on. There were still plenty of challenges we had to face. One of the biggest was that Cassie returned to her old job, supposedly part-time. But after a few months, she was back to her usual routine. It all came to a head the night before Kevin's soccer team was to play in the regional finals. Cassie wanted to cancel because she had a client who wanted to meet with her. I didn't get angry. I just felt sad. "Cassie, can we talk about this, please?" I asked. "Andy, this is an important client. I can't turn him away," she replied. "Cassie, you can do what you think is best, but just think about one thing. You only get so many special moments with your kids. Do you really want to look back and see that you missed most of those moments because of your job? If it becomes a higher priority, you might wake up one day and find that your kids don't want to spend time with you anymore." Cassie continued to argue that this client was significant for the firm's earnings. I told her that I had said all I could about it and she wouldn't hear more from me. I was disheartened that she was slipping back into her routine, and there was nothing I could do. I understood that Cassie appreciated her job, but I worried that if she kept at it, eventually, the kids and I would grow distant from her. On the day of Kevin's game, I stopped by Cassie's office, hoping she might have reconsidered. However, her assistant told me that she had gone to visit the client. I headed home, picked up the kids, and drove to the field. The sky was overcast and it was chilly, almost perfect weather for a game. I was watching Kevin's team warm up when someone sat down beside me. When I looked over, it was Cassie. She reached over and smiled at me. "You were right." That day turned out to be one of those rare, perfect days. Cassie had called the client and explained about her son's game. They were happy to reschedule. Kevin's team won the game 5-3, and Kevin scored one of the goals. We went out to celebrate afterward. Epilogue. The day before they released me from the hospital, I had a surprise visitor. Cassie and the kids were busy packing for our return trip when a man appeared in my doorway. It was President Sanchez. Alongside him was Captain Lopez. I was relieved to see that the captain seemed well, although he had a noticeable scar on his cheek and a bandage on his hand. "Mr. Spencer," the president said as I stood and extended my hand. Instead of shaking it, he pulled me into a gentle hug. "I'm so pleased to see you up and about. I was worried for a while that we might lose you. The world needs good people. Please, let's sit. I have something important to say to you." I took a seat across from him, and we talked about how we were both doing after the attack. The president shared that he had gone on TV that day to reassure the Mexican people that the cartels would be dealt with. Captain Lopez stood by the door, always vigilant. "Mr. Spencer, I truly am glad to see you recovering so quickly," the president said, patting my leg. "I came today not only to express my gratitude, but also on behalf of the Mexican people. That's very kind of you, Mr. President. But really, I was just protecting my family." "I know, but that doesn't lessen your role in helping us in that battle." The president paused to look at Captain Lopez. "I wanted to present this on national television, but Captain Lopez advised against it to protect you and your family." The captain stepped forward and retrieved a box from his coat. The president took out an elegant medal. I looked closely and saw an eagle holding a snake. "Would you please stand?" the president asked. Once we were both standing, he placed the ribbon holding the medal over my head. "On behalf of the people of Mexico, it is my honor to award you the Order of the Aztec Eagle for your role in supporting the fight against the drug cartels." The president kissed me on both cheeks and then shook my hand. Captain Lopez stepped forward, smiling, and gave me a gentle hug. "Mr. Spencer," the president continued, "the Order of the Aztec Eagle is the highest award Mexico gives to a non-citizen. You are a brave man, and I have great respect for you." "I'm truly honored," I replied, searching for words. "I'm honored but also humbled. I just did what I thought was right. I really don't feel like I deserve this." "No, you definitely do," the president insisted. "It is the very least we can do. You deserve so much more. Maybe when the issues surrounding the drug conflict are resolved, we will have a real celebration for those who worked hard in this fight. But sadly, I must take my leave now. As you might guess, I have many responsibilities and little time." In a flash, the president arrived and then departed. Cassie and the kids were quite impressed when I showed them the medal and shared that the president had given it to me personally. At Cassie's former workplace, one of the first changes was Ted's departure. He wasn't fired in the traditional sense, but was bought out for considerably less than what his share was worth, thanks to a clause in the partnership agreement. Ted threatened to challenge the decision, but once his unsavory actions became known, he chose to step away quietly. A video of him looking frightened in a helicopter surfaced online, as well as another clip of him hiding behind pool chairs. I suspect either Peter or Billy posted those videos, but I haven't had a chance to speak with them about it. I learned something else about Ted Walker. His wife didn't have a delayed arrival. He had simply told her he was busy that first day, while he was actually pursuing my wife. Once the truth surfaced, his wife filed for divorce. She had hired a private investigator who discovered multiple affairs. Coupled with his shameful behavior, she wanted nothing to do with him. The last I heard, Ted had moved to California, which seems fitting. It's a place where his actions align with many others. Maria's 3-part documentary received rave reviews and attracted a large audience, especially after the incident at the Fantasia Hotel. She won an Emmy for her work, and Peter was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for his film coverage of the cartel incident. And yes, Maria does still call me from time to time. Most of the time, she just wants to chat. Occasionally, she has a writing task for me. She also has a new boyfriend who runs several tuxedo stores and is involved in charitable work. They met at one of his charity events. I saw a picture of him. He seems nice, but not particularly remarkable. Still, from what Maria says, it's clear she is very happy with him. I hope it works out well for both of them. I hadn't told Cassie, but I found a literary agent who liked all 3 of my books. Yes, I wrote a 3rd book, and that one really captured his interest. This book is a continuation of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, titled A Christmas Tale Completed, The Redemption of Jacob Marley. My agent thinks it's a standout Christmas story. I hope he can persuade a publisher to take it on. After the soccer game, Cassie started distancing herself from her old firm and began to build her own practice from our new home. Even when her firm offered her a junior partnership, Cassie decided to decline. Our new home is an old farmhouse with a den and a sitting room on the first floor, along with a large living room, dining room, eat-in kitchen, and bathroom. The second floor has 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. We converted the den and sitting room into offices. Cassie chose the sitting room because it's near the front door, which provides space for a desk and chairs in the hallway. I took the den at the back of the house where it's quieter. I continue to accept assignments whenever they arise. I earned a good income writing about the incident, and I have agreed to write a book about my experiences, for which I received a notable advance. A humorous thing about Cassie's accounting practice is that when she gets busy, I help out. I always enjoyed working with numbers. I just didn't care for office politics. With Cassie's private practice, there's none of that. My reward for helping is simply our shared time together, which is a lovely bonus. We still have our minor ups and downs. There was a scare with Cassie when they found a lump on one of her breasts, but thankfully, it turned out to be benign. Kevin had a bad car accident shortly after getting his license, but he only sustained a broken wrist and some cuts. He healed well and now drives very cautiously. Sally is now in college, studying accounting, and she has a serious boyfriend who seems nice and fits in well with the family. It's still early to know if he's the one. Looking back on that day in Mexico City, I have mixed feelings. While I certainly don't appreciate the violence that occurred, there are some positive outcomes. The aftermath of the attack on President Sanchez led to stronger cooperation between the Mexican and American governments in combating the drug cartels, significantly hindering their operations. More importantly, it helped mend my marriage. I was able to regain my wife's love and respect. Hey listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.